Is Drew O'Connor primed for an even bigger year in 2024, 2025? Well, Pat and I are going to discuss that right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, and you can follow Pat on Twitter at Syndrome for Wet, and of course, you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So if you are watching on YouTube, you will notice that Pat is not next to me while we record this episode. Pat pre-recorded his takes for what we're going to discuss today just because he and his girlfriend had to leave a little earlier than expected for Philadelphia just because they have that wedding to go to this weekend. Remember, I'll be coming to you all solo for Friday, but we'll still do a show together today, but Pat pre-recorded his takes for today. But getting right into the meat of the show, we got to discuss Drew O'Connor's season in review as we continue our season review series. O'Connor was flat out outstanding for the Penguins this year, and his development has been really fun to follow throughout the last few years. I remember when he first came up, it was during the 2020-2021 season. He only played 10 games, but he looked very out of place in those games. Only had 1 point overall, but you could tell he really needed a lot of seasoning down in the AHL, etc. Then even the year after, 2021, 2022, he still looked like someone who was out of place at the NHL level. Then last season, you saw him start to take strides to becoming a full-time NHL player. And for what I saw at the end of last season, that was what made me really bullish on him, was because I could see him working on his shot. I could see him working on his skating. I can see him working on his two-way game. And he went 0 to 100 full on this year, 16 goals, 33 points in a big breakout year. Him and Lars Eller, by far the two best options for the Penguins in their bottom six. He played up top with Sidney Crosby. He spent time with Evgeny Malkin. He spent time with virtually every line this year. And I'll dig into the data in just a second, but no matter what line he was on, he was helping driving play. And I'm really excited about him heading into next season. I know I predicted him to score 20 this past year. I came close. I knew he was going to break out. I just didn't get the 20 goals right for him. But digging into the data a little bit right now, he spent 336 5-on-5 minutes with Sidney Crosby, 732 without. And his data with Crosby is better than his play without Crosby. But there is one number that I do want to highlight where I think it's more bad luck than anything. 18 goals for, 23 goals against with O'Connor and Crosby together. But when O'Connor is on a different line without Crosby, it's 31 goals for, 19 goals against. I'm just chalking that up to him getting more ice time with other lines. I think if you up that ice time to maybe 600 minutes, 650 minutes, that goal share is above water. It's not -5 or anything like that. But his numbers with Sid together, 53% of the expected goals, 53% of the scoring chances for them, 54% of the high danger chances. They were really good together overall. And it's nice that he is an option to play in the top six. I don't know if I want him there full time for all 82 games. I still think they should get another top six winger, someone like, again, Nikolai Ehlers if he's available, or just maybe anyone that's out there in the free agent market. But he is still someone that if an injury comes up, or, for example, the Jake Gensel trade that happened, you can slot him up there and he can play for 10, 15, 20 games and you really won't lose a beat either way. And he provided great value. I still come back to that goal against Boston late in the season. I know the Penguins lost that game and they didn't get the 2 points there. That's one of the reasons. There are a lot of reasons why this team missed the playoffs, but not getting 2 points there, I would say, is at least one of them. But that goal that he scored in the third period, to bring the Penguins within one was a work of art. He made Linus Ullmark and the entire Bruins players that were on the ice look really foolish. And at $925K for next season, he is a flat out steal. I'm expecting big things from him next year. I will say it on the podcast right now. He is scoring 22 to 24 goals next season. I think he tops 20, and I think he goes a little higher than that. But that's my season review on O'Connor. Now, let's get to Pat's thoughts on Drew O'Connor.
Hey everyone, I'm sure Hunter has already told you, but yes, today is a very weird episode since I am on the road traveling to Philadelphia for a wedding. So shout out to Katie and John. I can't wait to see you guys this weekend for your wedding. I know it's going to be beautiful. I don't even know if you listen to the show, but if you do, there's your shout out. It's not our only wedding gift, I promise. So let's get into Drew O'Connor. I loved the way he played this season. And I really don't want to oversell it. You know, it's really hard to say magnificent, spectacular, great, etc., because at the end of the day, we are talking about a depth forward. But you talk about Drew O'Connor, he is 25 years old. He plays a great, straightforward game. He does a lot of the little things right. He goes to the dirty areas of the ice. He's not afraid to get physical, but he showed a lot of offensive upside this season. I know Hunter will probably get more into the analytics of it and the advanced numbers for DOC this year, but you look at his counting stats this year, and it was a very solid season for DOC. 16 goals, 17 assists, 33 points, and in 79 games played. And this is the kind of development and step we were hoping he would take, because last 3 years, 2020, 21, the shortened year, and then 21, 22 and 22, 23, he showed flashes. He had moments where he looked like he was going to blossom into a very good middle six forward, but we never saw it consistently. He would go up and down in those times, both literally and figuratively. He'd be up and down from Wilkes-Barre Scranton, or he would just be up and down in his play. In this year, I think we saw a lot of consistency from him overall. You look at the way he played, especially at the end of the year. He fills in really well with Sidney Crosby. He doesn't seem out of place. He's doing the right things that you need to do to play with a talent like Sidney Crosby. However, I will say this about Drew O'Connor. If it gets to the point where he has to be in the top six, the Penguins are going to have a lot of problems. He is talented. I think he's got a lot of upside. I've often compared him to a lesser version, and I don't mean that as an insult, a lesser version of Brian Rust. He's a guy who plays a very straightforward game. He plays a very honest game. He can fill in just about anywhere you need him to. In a pinch, he's a good option in the top six, but ideally you would want him to be on your third line. You want him to be a depth option that can contribute in the bottom six as this team looks to get back to the postseason. He also is a guy who I think would be valuable on the penalty kill just for the straightforward, hard-nosed game he plays. But you can also see a spot for him on a second power play unit. Obviously, with all the talent and putting aside the power play woes of this past season, should this top power play get back to where it needs to be next season, you could see a world where Drew O'Connor plays on your second unit and comes out when the first unit struggles or just takes a 60, 90-second shift, and then you're at the back end and you want to have some more responsible players out there, but still an offensive threat, because he does have a good shot. He's not afraid to go to the front of the net. And those are two things, when you're putting together a second power play unit, really could be valuable. So overall, I really liked Drew O'Connor's development this season. I'd probably give his season overall a B+. You only look at 16 goals, 33 points. Even though he is a depth forward, that's not earth-shattering, but for where you ultimately want him to end up in your lineup and on your roster, that's a good season for him. Finally, he's the kind of player that Kyle Dubas has been talking about since the midpoint of the season, basically. He's only 25 years old. Once next season gets here, he'll be 26. Overall in his career, 157 games, 24 goals, 26 assists, 50 points. So that's a good depth option to have. And you hope as he hits that prime area of his career, those 26, 27, 28 years of age, he really starts to blossom into the kind of player that can get you 15 to 20 goals every season and continue to be a positive contributor up and down the lineup each night. So good season for Drew O'Connor. We really hope that he continues his development as well as he has from last season into next season. So Hunter, I will throw it back to you.
Yeah, I can't agree with Pat anymore, to be honest. And he gave him a B. Maybe I'll kind of be a little bit of a hypocrite there. I agree with everything except that. I'll give O'Connor an A for this season, which is with the way he developed, the way he was a great option in the bottom six, the way he played next to Sidney Crosby. Easy A for me, and I expect big things from him next season. I think even if he's not on the top line at times for this upcoming season, I still think he's going to score 20 plus this season, and he'll get a pretty nice raise on that next contract. I mean, you look at it right now, again, $925K for this upcoming season. He'll be a UFA after that. The Penguins, if he gets out to a pretty hot start, they may want to think about locking him up during the season, because if he gets to the market and he breaks out the way that I think he will even more, there will be teams lining up to get him in free agency for next year. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Brayden Yager and Moose Jaw are off to the Memorial Cup. Pat and I are going to look at how Brayden Yager played in the clinching game and how he can take his game to a new level in the Memorial Cup. But before we get to that, we have to tell you about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So congratulations to Brayden Yager and Moose Jaw. They sweep away Portland on Wednesday night, and they will be going to the Memorial Cup. That is the first time in Moose Jaw's franchise history that they will be playing for the Memorial Cup, and they won their first WHL championship. They absolutely took it to Portland throughout this entire series. It really wasn't even close, to be honest. It was a lot of fun watching Yager and Furcus do their thing. And heck, Yager had the primary assist on one of the goals last night, and it came off a brilliant first pass from Furcus to get it to Yager, who gets it to the front of the net. One of his teammates is there to clean up the garbage, but those two just work so damn good together. It's just going to be a shame, again, that Furcus is not in the Penguin system so that they can't carry this over to the Penguins and all that good stuff. And Moose Jaw, they'll be competing against Drummondville, who won the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, also the London Knights, and then the Saginaw Spirit, who is hosting the tournament. Moose Jaw will get underway May 24th against Saginaw. Again, Saginaw is hosting the tournament. And I really just want to see what Yager can do in these games. Now the stakes get even higher. You're competing for the Memorial Cup. How does he raise his game to an even higher level after what he did during the WHL playoffs? I mean, you look at his numbers overall, he was third in the WHL in points during the playoffs with 27 goals, 11. That's tied for fourth. He also had 16 points, just played at the level that me and I know a lot of other people were really hoping he was going to during these playoffs. And now, again, he just got to get to new heights for the Memorial Cup. And to provide more details on Brayden Yager and Moose Jaw, I now hand it over to Pat once again.
What an absolutely marvelous run for Brayden Yager and the Moose Jaw Warriors in the WHL playoffs. They finish off the sweep with a very solid 4-2 victory, as I'm sure Hunter has said, over the Portland Winterhawks to complete the sweep. Yager adds another assist. And one thing I want to touch on when it comes to Yager in this postseason, I said it yesterday, you can tell that this moment was not too big for him. He's playing in very important games. He gets Moose Jaw to the Memorial Cup. and he's a huge contributor with Ficus in their run. Really showed a lot of solid chemistry with him throughout the season and this playoff run. And I'm sure you've seen it all over Twitter today because a lot of the local reporters have retweeted it and shared it. He was one of the people interviewed after the victory when they were going through their celebrations, wearing their hats and having all the fun. But I know it's cliche. I know it's something that every single hockey player does and every single person who has played the sport loves to do after a championship in hockey. And they talk about, oh, this was a great team effort and we're so close and we're so tight. But he said, and I quote, "We are all brothers. We want the best for each other." And I think that played into how much we had each other's backs out there. I like this quote because I think it shows his commitment to being part of something bigger than himself. Because if you look at the Moose Jaw roster, a lot of these guys are the same age. They have been on Moose Jaw together for a handful of seasons. They built towards this. They have worked towards this for a handful of years now. And that to me gets into another thing I talked about yesterday, which is, he's more than likely going to end up back with Moose Jaw next year because he can't go to the American Hockey League in Wilkes-Barre. He's either going to have to make the NHL right out of camp or they're going to have to send him back. So I look at that and I see it as more than just the talent on the ice because he's got boatloads of it, as we've seen. Great season from him, great playoff run from him. But what I said yesterday is his next step in development when he goes back to junior, should he go back to junior, is he's got to become a leader. He has to be – he's probably going to be the captain. He's probably going to, at this point now, try to lead Moose Jaw back to the Memorial Cup tournament next season when he returns. Again, should he return. And this will be the next part of his development is, can you be a leader? Can you be somebody in those pressure-packed moments, in those high-stakes situations that is able to keep a level head, that is able to be collective and put the team in front of you and lead them to that next level? Because we all know juniors, everybody who comes out of juniors at one point or another for the most part was the big fish in the small pond. And then the NHL, AHL, ECHL, you're in the ocean. You're no longer the big fish. You're in the ocean with all the other big fish, and you got to find a way to stand out, and you got to find a way to eat. So rounding out that intangible, I know that's a dirty word in hockey talk these days, but rounding out that intangible for him is going to be huge for his development. And I think we saw a lot of it in the WHL playoff and this past season as well. But we will keep following him in the Memorial Cup tournament as well as the Moose Jaw Warriors to see what they do as they look to capture the Memorial Cup.
I can't agree anymore with Pat there. I think a lot of that we discussed during the Wednesday episode when it came to Yager and how Moose Jaw had a chance to sweep Portland in the WHL championship. But yeah, him becoming more of a leader, him also maybe breaking the point total that he had this year, maybe breaking the goal total that he had this year if he goes back to junior, that's going to be big for him as well if he goes back. But again, there's still a possibility, even though it's low, that he could be on this team for next season. I said it during Wednesday. I'll say it again here. That would be an added bonus for the Penguins if he's able to do what he did in camp this past year, but maybe turn it up 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 notches overall. But that'll do it for this second segment. Coming up to end the show, 8 years ago today, Sidney Crosby checked off a pretty massive moment for his career. Pat and I are going to discuss what we remember from 2016 Game 2 Penguins Lightning as Sidney Crosby got that massive overtime winner less than a minute into that game. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our next sponsor, and that is Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute deals for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You can also do flash deals, save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. There's also zone deals, save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. There's also all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, you can get a full view from your seat in the app before you buy, and the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined, of course, by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So 8 years ago today, Penguins Lightning game 2 goes to overtime. And I tweeted this earlier in the day, and I still very much stand by it. But when I was watching that game, when I was only 18 years old, I was saying to myself, I feel like we could be playing all night just because the way these two teams were playing in regulations. Tied 2-2. There's not a lot of space out there. Tampa Bay's not giving the Penguins much of anything. Same in return. The Penguins really aren't giving the Lightning much of anything. And heck, I know Jonathan Drouin was turning into a Penguins killer in that series. He was tremendous for the Lightning throughout that series. But you know who was also great in that series, especially that game? Andrei Vasilevskiy. I'll admit, I thought the Penguins were easily going to have this in the bag when Ben Bishop went out. And I remember in game 1 when he got hurt and you could hear him screaming through the TV. That was a really scary sight. And I had no idea who Vasilevskiy was at the time, but I sure found out pretty quickly how good this kid was, considering fast forward 8 years later, he's arguably the best goaltender in the league. He's been fantastic ever since that series, but he was not giving the Penguins an inch, and it took a perfect play for the Penguins to win that game. Rust comes in with Crosby, delivers a beautiful pass, and then Crosby just fires it blocker side on Vasilevskiy. I know I've seen people saying, like, look at the curve that Sid has right there, and you can definitely see it when he releases the puck there, but Vasilevskiy had no shot. I remember just going crazy in my basement, going to school the next day, of course, rubbing it in the faces of the Caps people there just because I was so excited that the Penguins were going on this deep run. But that was such an amazing moment, especially for Crosby, because he had not done that in his career yet. He had not had an overtime winner for the Penguins. If you go back and look at the playoff history for the Penguins with Crosby there, 2007, 08, 09, et cetera, he had never had an overtime winner, but he finally was able to check that off here. It was a legendary moment for a legendary player and easily one of the biggest goals for the Penguins in their run to winning the 2016 Stanley Cup. Now, here's Pat's thoughts on that goal 8 years later.
Really hard to believe that the 2016 Stanley Cup run is nearly a decade old, and that 8 years ago today, Sidney Crosby scored that incredible overtime goal against the Tampa Bay Lightning in game 2 to keep them from completely surrendering home ice advantage to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Eastern Conference Final. But the one thing I could not stop thinking of today, and I said it on Twitter this afternoon or this morning, whenever that was, I'm always the guy who kind of talks about hockey night in Canada, despite being from Pittsburgh, living in Pittsburgh or the surrounding areas pretty much all of my life. The best part of that goal to me, and this is no disrespect to the great Doc Emmerich, who we all miss and we all love and is one of the titans of the sport, is him saying, or on the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, on the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, all intermission after the third period, they were going on and on about how Sidney Crosby's done all this amazing stuff in the National Hockey League, but one of the things he's never done is scored an overtime winner in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I mean, this was a topic of discussion for an entire segment, talking about this guy on the Penguins and their history has scored an overtime goal, that guy, all this stuff. And Crosby wins this game with only less than a minute played in that overtime period. And whoever was on the call for Hockey Night in Canada just says, well, he's got an overtime goal now. And really, it was such a great goal because great shot from Sid going down to one knee, putting the puck in the net, a great pass from Brian Rust to set it up, an even better outlet pass from Brian Dumoulin in the neutral zone to get the play going. And great awareness, as always, from Sidney Crosby to see that it was a bit of a broken play with a Tampa Bay defender trapped, so he gets to a soft spot so he can score. But, that's a huge goal for them in that run because Tampa Bay was one shot away from going up 2-0 and essentially burying this team in the Eastern Conference Final. And Tampa was looking to avenge a Stanley Cup loss the prior year when they lost to the Chicago Blackhawks in the Stanley Cup Final. So huge goal, great moment. I could go on and on for hours about that cup run. That is probably my favorite Penguins team because I always say that 2009 felt like it was the start and we were going to get so many more. And yes, I know all of 7 years is not that long to wait for another Stanley Cup in the grand scheme of things. But with all the playoff disappointments that happened between then and then, it just felt like, yes, finally, they got the weight off their back. They got their other Stanley Cup. We can stop all this nonsense about them being a one-hit wonder and so on and so forth. But great goal. And before I sign off and send it back to Hunter, thank you to all of you guys listening and tuning into today's episode. I know it's a very bizarre episode since I'm on the road and Hunter's running the show today. So big shouts to him too for putting this all together. It's why he is the leader of Locked On Penguins. It's why he's the MVP. It's why I call him the illustrious Hunter Hodes. So thank you guys as always for listening. I will be back next week. Treat Hunter fairly and enjoy whatever he brings your way on Friday. And I will talk to you guys next week.
That's the nicest thing Pat's ever said about me overall, but that's a perfect way to end the Thursday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode. Yes, people, I understand this is a very weird, very bizarre episode, probably one that we'll never have to do again, but hey, that's what happens when Pat has to go to a wedding, but I'm just glad that he was able to put his takes out there about the topics that we had for today's show. But again, that will do it for today's episode. I'll be back with another show for you all on Friday. Maybe I'll bring on a guest to discuss another Penguin season review and all other things relating to the Pittsburgh Penguins. For Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it, and I'll be back on Friday.